Human society has always been changing throughout history, but the concept of development adopted an unprecedented meaning and level of pace since the 19th century. Fueled primarily by rapid technological advancements, global economic development entered a phase unseen in the many millennia beforehand. In the year 1000 AD, global GDP figures were around 210 billion US dollars and had risen to 1.2 trillion in 1820. However, the next 2 centuries tell a completely different story of economic development. By 1900, global GDP had risen to 3.2 trillion, and in 2014, this number was recorded at 105 trillion US dollars. Literacy rates, average lifespan, and other healthcare indicators will accentuate the same trends highlighted in GDP growth, that global economic development has reached unheralded heights. In most of human history, development was primarily viewed through the lens of profits yielded, and only recently has sustainability, and especially cultural sustainability, become a topic of discussion. The relationship between economic development and cultural sustainability is multifaceted and delicate, and the two are able to coexist only under specific circumstances. What then are these circumstances? And how can policymakers balance the goal of economic development and cultural sustainability? The Tibetan Plateau today is a prime example of a place where such tensions lie. Tibet Autonomous Region was formally established in 1965 by the Chinese government. The ensuing decades have brought turbulent change in Tibet, both economically and socially, with economic development closely mirroring that of China as a whole. China's investment in Tibet has been quite impressive. Tibet has recorded double-figure GDP growth for 26 consecutive years, ranking number 1 in China this year. Lifespan and other healthcare benchmarks have risen dramatically as well. This has had a huge impact on the lifestyles of the Tibetan people. So the question now is, following such intense economic development, will the Tibetan culture survive? To answer these questions, we'll look at 2 main points. To sustain culture is not necessarily to preserve what is antique and traditional. New versions of local culture are equally authentic as the old. Culture is constantly evolving, and what a well-preserved culture means should be left to be defined by the people who are affected. So this video will be based on field research and first-hand conversations with Tibetans, Han Chinese migrants, and policymakers. The lifestyles of Tibetans have experienced major changes in the past few years. Following the building of railways, airports, and roads, there has been a major increase in information and product flow from mainland China. Not only are Han people able to purchase goods from home, Tibetans have also adopted different purchasing patterns. Many Tibetans dress in a similar manner to Han people, or even what is considered popular attire across the Western world. However, at temples and religious gatherings, there are crowds of Tibetans dressed in traditional robes, chanting sutras and performing prostrations. Many Tibetans who have traditionally led a grazing lifestyle have turned to farming or forms of employment. Due to more farming practices and the increased flow of goods from mainland China and other countries, the daily diet of a Tibetan household has also undergone changes. Traditionally, Tibetan food has been largely meat-based, and now more families are introducing other foods, such as rice, to their diets. Many Tibetans even prefer to drink Budweiser or mainland Chinese beer as opposed to the locally produced brand, stating better taste as the primary reason. Such a combination of retaining traditional culture while adopting what is new does not pertain only to clothing and food. In daily language, at least in Lhasa, most Tibetans speak both their native tongue and Mandarin Chinese. In schools, although Mandarin has become the main language constituting 90% of classes, Tibetan and English are also taught, and more children in rural areas are learning Mandarin. However, attitudes towards the bilingual system is not purely a positive one. Although Tibetan is taught in schools, if a student cannot master Mandarin, he has little hope of a professional future, and whether he can speak Mandarin or not has become crucial to his livelihood. Governmental jobs and white-collar professions often require candidates to learn Mandarin. If one wants to pursue a more prestigious or higher income lifestyle, Mandarin is a prerequisite, not only in Tibet, but also across China. With the immense opportunities presented by economic growth, such as the ability to access better education and profession, the Tibetan tongue has become something that many must sacrifice. Many Tibetans from rural areas have migrated to Lhasa for various reasons, one being pursuing types of employment other than grazing. These professions could include blue-collar and white-collar jobs, entrepreneurship, and tourism. In rural areas, farming has also become more prevalent. Habits pertaining to lifestyle, language, profession, and education are certainly different in modern-day Tibet. Many changes are brought by the far-reaching effects of development, including opportunities, new products, better access to health and education, as well as cross-cultural influences. Interviewees noted that such changes happened quickly and drastically, and when asked whether Tibetans regarded these phenomena as threatening to the sustainability of their culture, the answer was not a simple one. But what was common between these discussions was that if certain old habits could be lost, and new ones could be adopted so quickly, then the former had most likely not been fundamental aspects of the local deep-rooted culture anyway. So what about these deep-rooted culture values? Have they changed as well? Belief systems and values in Tibet are almost entirely rooted in their prominent religion, Tibetan Buddhism. Although Tibet is now governed by the Communist Party of China, and the ability to practice religion has gone through periods of heavy control and relative freedom, Tibetan Buddhism has managed to thrive to this day and even extended its influence outside of Tibet. Although lifestyle and habits have changed, more than 90% of Tibetans are still Buddhists. Every Tibetan I encountered during my research are Buddhists, and so are their entire families. When asked whether they regularly practice their religion, the answer is an overwhelmingly yes. I proceeded to ask whether their attitudes towards the religion has changed in the past few years due to the adoption of different lifestyles. Such answers were seen across the board, and even some of the Han interviewees, such as Mr. W, has become a disciple of His Holiness, the 17th Karmapa. When I delved into the question of how they see Tibetan Buddhism being sustainable in the long run, one interviewee said, "The Buddha is in our hearts, and we would have to lose everything else before losing this fundamental aspect of our being." The contrary is also likely true. If Buddhism is to be lost in Tibet, then most of what one considers to be Tibetan culture will falter as well. It is deeply ingrained in Tibetan culture that protecting heritage comes before many other, more material pursuits. The PRC government has taken measures to revamp old towns and refurbish ancient buildings. This will ensure that a significant portion of traditional culture remains sustainable going forward. It will also promote tourism and in turn boost the economy. The uncertainty here is whether tourism will eventually cause more harm to what is being preserved. An old Lhasa town as well as Jokhang Temple settled within it will only become a symbol of what used to be. After delving deeper into the concept of wealth, most of the conversations yielded rather similar answers. It is not in the general Tibetan mindset that money is the most important. This allows the government to do certain things like preserving old temples and towns, but on the other hand, it can be counterproductive to developing the economy. For many, having decent standards of living is often enough. It is unclear whether this mindset will change in the future, following more benefits brought by economic development. But as of now, as one interviewee puts it, as long as decent living conditions are met, Tibetans don't really need much more. For economic development to be feasible while ensuring culture is sustained, the benefits from development has to be mutually beneficial to the government and the people. Apart from GDP figures, life expectancy in Tibet rose from 35.5 years in 1951 to 69.2 years today. The literacy rate in Tibet is estimated at around 65%, and although this is the lowest in China's provinces, it is a significant increase from around only 5% literacy rate in 1951. Are such infrastructural developments welcomed? Or do some Tibetans have their own reservations about certain actions that the government took in the name of development? While Tibetans have nuanced feelings concerning changes in lifestyle and its effects on certain cultural values, overall they welcome the opportunity for a better livelihood and do not believe that these infrastructural advancements come with unnecessary sacrifices to their existing culture. Most people living in remote areas also express similar sentiments concerning infrastructural advancement. Since healthcare and education are developed more rapidly in larger cities, more people are incentivized to move and congregate, and the government has created a vast network of roads and additional housing to aid in this process. Over 2,200 schools were established in Tibet by 2017, and the enrollment of children in public schools in Tibet reached 98.8% in 2010. Similar to the advancement of healthcare, the government sponsored comprehensive development plans over the course of multiple decades, covering most fees related to public education, and bringing many educational professionals from the mainland to give aid. However, education in Tibet is more controversial than healthcare, primarily due to the content of the curriculum and its relationship with Tibetan culture. Many critics feel that Tibetan culture, language, and history are not emphasized enough in education, or is deliberately omitted from the curriculum, substituted by content promoting Chinese patriotism and political values. Influx of Han migrants seeking employment and business opportunities in Tibet also draw the ire of some critics, the notion being that these people are the prime beneficiaries of government stimulus policies and take value from Tibetan locals. In the case of Tibet, the key area to manage going forward will be to develop the area in a way that does not threaten the local environment and deep-rooted cultural values. To allow people access to better lives is something that is largely welcomed, to a certain extent, unless it jeopardizes those values that are more important to the Tibetan people than material well-being, such as the environment or religion.